Hello there, YouTube. Sorry for the long delay in putting out a new video. I've been working 50 to 55 hours a week pretty much since Thanksgiving, with a slow week only being about 45 hours. I really haven't had the time or the energy to put anything out. But I am today, and I'm doing a video on the greatest role-playing system ever, which is GURPS. I'm going to talk about tech level in this one, and also kind of briefly do a book review for GURPS Low Tech. This is the 3rd edition version, but most of the information in here is going to be similar, if not identical, to the 4th edition. Little things like numbers, how damage is done on weapons, those will change, but the vast majority of information is going to be about what sort of technology was available in what periods of history, and that doesn't matter what version of GURPS or any system. If you want to make changes to whatever system you play, or add on to it, or develop it further, or even create new game worlds based on alternate histories or timelines. And technology level is something very intrinsic to GURPS. I don't know of any other systems that do it, but technology level in GURPS is part of its part of its balancing factor that it always incorporates intrinsically into the system, which is why I like it so much, and why I recommend it as being one of, if not the best system as far as I'm concerned, because I don't really play any other systems that much anymore. But technology level allows, mostly from a GM's point of view, allows the GM to have different periods of history, or different periods of time, or levels of technology as the book describes it, keeping things in an organized fashion, so more primitive forms of technology aren't accidentally misused. As not everybody is going to be an expert on history, not everyone's going to be an expert on the development of human technology and civilization throughout the ages. And what this handy little book does, I think you can get them used anywhere from 10 to 15 bucks now. It breaks it up into different technology levels, and we'll talk about the first 3, which is 0, or first 4, which is 0 through 3, and these are the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and I think the book might call it this too, but I refer to it simply as the Steel Age, which is TL3. In each progression marks a different use in energy sources, in tools, in building and construction, in transportation. Warfare is going to be an obvious change, but also things like medicine are affected by the change as well, and even agricultural improvements. Starting with the beginning, in TL0, a lot of those things I just mentioned either simply don't apply, or in such a primitive state that it's hard to recognize them. But TL0, the Stone Age, is not an absence of technology. It is simply the simplest technology available to human beings that would be recognizable as technology, and they would be recognizable as human beings. We're not, in TL0, you wouldn't be wearing woven fibers like cotton or hemp. You're going to be skins. The clothing technology was wearing animal fur and using sharpened pieces of stone to scrape the inner side of the skin, so you just have a fur pelt. It would be, at the very simplest, clay jars and baskets, I would consider to be TL0. I don't think the book goes into great detail on that, but it would be safe to assume that's TL0. Things like transportation technology, no riding animals at TL0. That's also a big hallmark of the difference between TL0 and TL1, even though they're both very primitive. Domestication of animals has virtually not happened, and transportation, you can't do wagons, you can't do chariots. The simplest thing is rafts and canoes. The harnessing wind power has not happened. Boats that are big enough to haul large quantities of goods or people just simply don't exist. Medicine is going to be herbalism and very primitive amputation if somehow it calls for it, but the very crude attempts at setting bones, but there's probably going to be no anesthetic unless it's an environment where you can easily pick a cocaine plant or something like that to take the edge off, but I wouldn't count on it. Energy is going to be the simplest form. Wind power to dry your clothes, and fire by taking sticks and rubbing them together, that's TL0. Weapons are going to be stone weapons, and that sometimes means sharpened rocks, a hand axe, which is, you normally think an axe has a big long handle and then the bladed part, where a Stone Age hand axe is just that bladed part, and the handle is actually your arm. You grip at it at the rounded soft side at the back of it, and then you have a chopping edge that you can use. But taking a step further, but still TL0, the Aztecs used obsidian pieces sandwiched together in a board that made a sword, and then what I've seen of tests that have been done by the few scholars that are willing to construct models and try and recreate that, they don't last very long, but initially they do have the power to cleave off limbs. As you parry with them and you use them more, the very simplistic construction breaks down rather quickly, so by the end of battle you'd probably need a new one. But a sword made with TL0 technology is possible if your players are creative and as a GM you're willing to work with them. So TL0 does not necessarily mean boring, but it does mean very simplistic. TL1, now we're getting into the Bronze Age. All those things that I said they don't have in TL0, they for the most part start to develop, and we recognize a TL0 civilization. As a GM, you'd be able to recognize the main difference, not just the fact that they're using bronze technology, because even peasants out in the countryside are still living rather simplistically, but the big differences are they're using animals to pull plows and pull wagons. Wagons exist now, the wheel's been invented. Ships exist, not just canoes and little dugout boats, but actual planked ships are invented, used quite a bit in the Mediterranean, but also in the Indian and Pacific Ocean and the island chains in that area. Seagoing technology probably rose faster than land transportation, especially in South and Eastern Asia. As far as warfare goes, bronze breastplates, you're probably going to be copper axes, copper maces, and bronze swords and or spear points possibly. Your tools, all those stone tools are now being replaced by bronze and copper tools. So there's a bit of that modern element that will make it. You can actually go to a store or go to a smith at least and be like, I need a woodworking tool of such sort, an adze. It's a scraper. He'll build you one if he doesn't have one. Whereas in TL0, you either had to trade for it or build it yourself. And that's another big hallmark of TL1. It's not a universal concept yet, but cities, and most definitely by TL2, which is the Iron Age, cities exist, and they are walled cities. They're not just little villages, they're not just collections of farming communities, but they're cities, which means farmers from at least half a day's travel are now coming into, or farther, are now coming into one area to try and sell off their goods. And they're selling them to people that don't farm, which are craftsmen and your nobility, which starts to exist around this time too. TL1 in smaller societies not so much, but by TL2 there's a big enough surplus of population, and concepts of nobility and class structure are very formed. Some groups like the Romans, and the Greeks tend to formulate their class structure into who is allowed to vote and who can fight. In India, for example, you actually have one of the most complicated class hierarchies, the caste system, beginning in its infancy in this technology level. As far as using medicine, they're pretty much the same by the Iron Age. A little bit more experimentation is being taken place. Attempts to amputate limbs are a lot more successful. Battlefield medicine, removing spear points and arrowheads and that kind of thing is now possible. But the biggest jump is, of course, going from iron to bronze. The water wheel is also a major invention. Doesn't seem like much, but grinding your own grain is a laborious and time-consuming process. It's a hell of a lot easier to have an automated wheel that just constantly grinds based on the energy of the flowing river versus an ox or a team of donkeys or something that just keeps circling it over and over and over again, which eventually they have to stop and you have to monitor them, whereas the other technology, it's automated, which is a new concept. TL3, which is, I call it the Steel Age, fitting in with the other two. I think the book might actually call it the same thing, but biggest jump in technology is, of course, the metallurgy. Instead of using simple bronze and evolving into iron, iron is now being heated at much higher temperatures and creating steel, which means more intricate tools, which means deadlier weapons and more functional armor. But it also means things like ocean-going ships are now going to be possible. Cranes and heavy construction of buildings is now at least less time-consuming than it had been in previous centuries. Medicine has also finally taken a fairly significant leap by TL3, and it may seem primitive by our standards, but the idea of using maggots and leeches, really gross, seems primitive, but they're still used today for very certain things. Both primarily being used to stop infections, or I know one bit of technology, and I'm using this term very loosely, technology, is So you got your finger cut off, you sew it back on, and this is in the Middle Ages, they put a leech on the end of it so it'd draw the blood back into the finger, and that would sometimes actually work. So it's primitive by our standards, but if it works, it's an advancement. It's certainly an advancement over, I guess we'll just have to make a couple sacrifices of sheep to the gods. You take this mysterious herb and we'll just roll with it. I mean, if you got another option. Now, all this technology and these different tech levels, you might be sitting there going, well, this is great if you're running a historical campaign, but you don't have to use these technology levels in a historical context. I really don't like using movies as examples, but I'm going to say they're fictional movies, and we're all going to know they're fictional movies. So, if it makes it any clearer what the different tech levels are, 10,000 BC would be a perfect example of TL0. You're just getting into what TL1 is, and they imply that they're probably aliens. Sorry if you haven't seen the movie and it's a spoiler, but apparently aliens built everything in the ancient age anyway, so you should already kind of know that. So that would be a good example, TL0. TL1, the Scorpion King movie, and even the Dwayne Johnson's other newer release, the Hercules movie, they're both TL1. They're both a fictional setting, looking at it from two different points of view, but certainly in the Scorpion King there's elements of magic, and there's definitely an alternate history and alternate timeline that you can work with, and there's still definitive stuff that says this is on Earth. They're following a realistic historical progression, or at least they're doing it in the context of their own kind of story that they've narrated. And then for TL2 and 3, I would say the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings, the orcs would most definitely be TL2. The humans would be leaving TL2 and entering TL3, and the elves and the dwarves would be TL3 for sure. They're using steel weapons. They're building these epic structures, and they're described in the movies. They're still wearing this heavy armor, but it doesn't seem to slow them down. So I'd imagine they've got metallurgical techniques that are available to them that aren't available to the other technologies. Mithril, you don't really ever find out exactly what it is, but I would consider it a higher tech level metal is what it comes down to. Probably a couple other movies that are less historical, or at least kind of highlight these certain periods. One would be the Pathfinder. It probably came out in the last 5 or 6 years, but it's about a young boy who is stranded in North America. And he comes from a Viking culture, but he's raised by the Native Americans. So two different cultures, but also the Native Americans are going to be TL0 and the Vikings are TL2. And there's basically the whole movie revolves around this conflict. And if you're curious what the collision is when those two groups come together, that's a perfect example. Another great example. I like this example not just for GURPS or TL crap, but like the Conan movies. And I know if you read the books and the comic books, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan the Barbarian, and Conan the Destroyer, oh, it's nothing like the Red Sonja's kind of part of that, but it's part of the same mythos. I guess it deviates at some point. I haven't read them, and I'm sorry, but I like the movies and I like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the cool thing about it from a GM's point of view is you get your party in both movies. You have your fighter, or your barbarian, whichever class you want to call him. The Arnold's character, Conan, but you also have usually a thief-type character. You have a mage. In the second movie, you kind of have redundant characters, like Grace Jones's character could be considered maybe even a multi-class fighter thief. But it has that, but also has TL1 technology. I guess you could kind of say that it might be TL1, TL2, but other than the riddle of steel, the making certain weapons out of steel, by and large, the movies at least really focus on a TL1 sort of world. So there's a completely fictional setting where the primitive technology is still part of the narrative and doesn't make it boring whatsoever. So you can incorporate it into an existing non-GURPS campaign, the technology level, or you can use it to kind of define it and reshift what your current campaign is. If you're looking for a high fantasy, it wouldn't hurt to make it TL2 or TL3. That would probably be the default. But maybe you want it to be more primitive, or maybe you want certain races to be more primitive. In my high fantasy GURPS game world, my orcs are all TL2. The humans are TL3, and the dwarves and elves and gnomes are all TL4 and 5. So it does make it very distinct. And for a historical role player, the clash of two different levels of technology, if you don't read a lot of history, which I assume you do since you're a historical role player, if that's what you're interested in, that pretty much is the basis for so many conflicts throughout human civilization. Crusades were a clash of technologies. The Mongols were a clash of technologies. The conquistadors versus the Aztecs were a clash in technologies. It's a pretty overarching theme, and you could at least make an adventure out of it, if not a whole campaign. But I've rambled on for long enough. Comment, subscribe. Tell me my hat looks stupid, but thanks for watching.